Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've fixed a lot of broken things on a lot of ships, and I'll tell you the one rule that holds every time. When two systems fail at the exact same moment, it isn't a coincidence. Two separate things don't just decide to stop working in the same second. Something caused it. There's always a cause. I spent the first 3 hours after it happened looking for the cause. I went through every diagnostic I had, pulled logs, checked connections, restarted subsystems in sequence. I was so focused on finding the mechanical explanation that I didn't look out the forward scope for a long time. That was probably a mercy. I think I needed those 3 hours of not knowing. My name is Cole, and I was the flight systems engineer on the Varda, a mid-sized research vessel about 14 months into a deep space survey contract. There were 5 of us. Ren flew the ship, quiet and precise, the kind of pilot who makes everything look boring because she never lets it get exciting. Danny ran the research equipment, eager in a way that some people find exhausting, but I always liked. Our medic was a woman named Sura, practical and unflappable, and Boone handled cargo and general maintenance, a big, quiet man who fixed things with his hands the way some people solve problems with words. I'd worked with Ren before, one previous run, and trusted her completely. The others I'd met at the crew briefing 6 weeks before departure and had gotten along with well enough. It was a good crew, comfortable, the kind of group that finds its rhythm early and stays in it. We were about 4 days out from the midpoint of our survey route when navigation went down. It happened at a little after 2 in the afternoon by ship time. I was in the systems bay running a routine check on the fuel relay when my console lit up with a dropout alert. Navigation had gone offline, not degraded, not throwing errors, just offline, like someone had reached in and turned it off at the source. I wasn't immediately alarmed. Navigation dropouts happen. They're annoying, and they need to be fixed, but they're not dangerous in open space where there's nothing to run into. I pulled up the diagnostic tree and started working through it from the top. About 10 minutes in, Ren called me from the bridge. "Cole, when you get a second." Her voice had that specific flatness that I'd learned on our previous run, meant she was keeping herself calm on purpose. I went to the bridge. The forward scope on the Varda was a good one, wide angle, high resolution, the kind of equipment that makes deep space survey work actually worthwhile. Ren was standing in front of it, and she stepped aside when I came in without saying anything, just moved out of the way so I could see. I looked at the scope for a long time without speaking. There was something out there, directly ahead of us, close enough that it filled most of the scope's field of view, which given our range settings meant it was either very near or very large or both. It was dark, not the dark of space, which has texture to it, depth, the scattered light of distant stars. This was a different dark, a surface dark, something that absorbed light rather than letting it pass. No reflective sheen, no visible features, just an enormous shape against the star field, blocking out everything behind it. "How long has that been there?" I asked. "I don't know," Ren said. "I didn't see it until I looked up from the controls. It wasn't there an hour ago. I would have noticed. How far out? She told me the range reading, and I did the math, and neither of us said anything for a moment. That's what killed navigation, I said. That's what I think too. I went back to the systems bay and looked at the dropout timestamp again. Navigation had gone offline at the exact same moment Wren estimated the object had appeared. Not before, not after. The same second. I want to be honest about what I thought at that point, which is that I thought it was a natural phenomenon, something with a magnetic field strong enough to interfere with our navigation array, a dark body, a rogue object drifting through the sector, something that wasn't on our charts because it had moved through after the charts were made. The universe is full of things we haven't catalogued yet. I was a systems engineer, not a scientist, and my instinct was always to reach for the mechanical explanation first. I told Wren my theory, and she nodded and said it made sense, and we got to work trying to bring navigation back online. It came back up after about 40 minutes. I found a fried coupling in the array connection and swapped it out, and the system restarted clean. I felt good about that. I felt like we'd solved the problem. Then I looked at our heading. We were pointed directly at the object, not approximately, not roughly, exactly, and we were moving toward it. I checked the engines. They were running normally. I checked the thrust output. Normal. I checked the navigation system I'd just fixed, and it was reading our course as straight ahead, which was correct, because straight ahead was where we were going, and where we were going was toward the object. I put in a course correction manually, a simple 10-degree turn to port, enough to take us off the approach line. The system accepted it. The engines adjusted. For about 4 minutes, we were turning. Then the heading drifted back. I sat there watching the navigation display slowly, smoothly, return us to the same line. No alert, no error, just the ship deciding, or something deciding for the ship, that we were going this way. I called everyone to the common area and told them what I'd found. I showed them the heading, the drift, the correction that hadn't held. I showed them the object on the scope. Danny pressed up to the scope for a long time without saying anything, and then stepped back and said it looked like it was made of something. He didn't know how else to describe it. It had the quality of a surface rather than a void, like it was a thing and not just an absence. Boone asked how long until we reached it at our current rate. I told him about 9 days. Nobody said anything to that for a moment. Sura asked if we could send a distress signal, and I told her we could try, though at our distance from the nearest relay, it would be hours before it reached anyone and longer before anyone could act on it. I sent it anyway. I sent 3 of them, spaced an hour apart, and I don't know if any of them got through because we never received confirmation. Wren spent the afternoon trying course corrections from the pilot controls while I tried them from the systems bay, both of us working independently, checking each other's approaches. None of them held for more than a few minutes. The drift back was always the same, always smooth, always settling us onto the same line like a compass needle finding north. The sounds started on the second day. I want to be careful describing them because they weren't dramatic. They weren't loud. They were the kind of sounds that a ship makes anyway. Hull creaks, pressure adjustments, the low random ticking of metal under thermal stress. The difference was the rhythm. Hull sounds are random. These weren't random. They came in sets, 3 or 4 sounds close together, and then a pause, and then 3 or 4 more, and they moved through the hull from the bow toward the stern, like something was walking the outside of the ship from front to back. Boone heard them first and came to me about it. We did a full exterior check and found nothing wrong. No impacts, no breaches, no pressure differentials. Whatever was making the sounds wasn't causing damage. It was just there. The balance issues were harder to pin down. The ship's gravity system was functioning normally by every reading I had, but twice on the second day, I stepped out of the systems bay and had to catch myself on the doorframe because the floor felt wrong, tilted, like the ship had listed slightly to one side. Both times, it passed in a few seconds. Both times, I checked the gravity system and it was reading fine. Sura came to me privately on the second evening and said she'd had the same experience, and Boone had mentioned it to her too. She also told me she'd gone to check on Danny and found him at the scope, which wasn't unusual, but he'd been there for 6 hours without a break, and when she'd spoken to him, he'd taken a long time to respond, like he was coming back from somewhere far away. I went and stood next to Danny at the scope. He didn't look at me. "You should eat something," I said. "It's not doing anything," he said. "It's just there. It's not moving. It's not putting out a signal. It's just there, and it's pulling us in, and it doesn't care that we're here." "I know. That's the part I can't get past," he said. "Not that it exists, that it just doesn't care." I didn't have anything useful to say to that, so I got him a food pack from the processor and set it next to him and left him there. I think I understood what he meant. I just didn't want to stand at the scope long enough to feel it the way he was feeling it. On the third day, I dug into the object's position coordinates and cross-referenced them against every chart and survey log in our system, going back as far as the records went. The object wasn't on any chart. That wasn't surprising. What was surprising was what I found when I worked backward from its position and our approach vector. Our survey route had been set months before departure, plotted by a mission planning team back home. If I extended our original route forward, before any drift, before any heading change, we would have passed about 6 days' travel to the left of the object's position. Close enough to have spotted it, maybe, but not close enough to be drawn in. The drift had started 4 days ago. At our current rate, accounting for the drift, we were going to pass within a much closer range than our original route would have allowed. I couldn't tell if that was the drift doing it, or if the drift had been doing it from further back. Small corrections over a long time that had been steering us gradually into range before navigation ever went down. I didn't have the logs to prove it either way, but I thought about the mission planning team back home, the route they'd plotted months ago, and I wondered if they'd had any idea what they were plotting it near. I pulled up the object's coordinates and ran them against historical survey records, older ones, going back to the earliest deep space missions on record. The object's position was consistent across all of them, the ones that covered this sector anyway. It had been sitting in that exact spot for longer than we'd been sending ships out here to look. It had always been there. We just hadn't come close enough before. Wren came to me on the 4th day with an idea. She wanted to try a controlled burn, both main engines at high thrust for a sustained period, enough raw force to push us off the approach angle even if the drift tried to correct. Not a navigation adjustment, just fire and physics. The risk was fuel. A burn like that would eat into our reserves in a way that would make the return trip uncomfortable at best. But we had 9 days until we reached the object, or we'd had 9 days 4 days ago, and the math was getting less generous. We ran the burn that evening. Both engines, full thrust, 20 minutes sustained. The ship shuddered and groaned in a way I felt in my back teeth. Ren held the controls, and I watched the heading display. It worked. We pulled off the approach line, slowly, fighting the whole way. But we moved. When the burn ended, we were about 12 degrees off our previous heading, and the drift back started almost immediately, but it was slower this time, like the distance had weakened the pull slightly. We bought ourselves some time, maybe 2 extra days before we'd be back on the approach line. We also used fuel we didn't have to spare. Ren and I sat in the systems bay afterward and looked at the numbers. We could do one more burn like that maybe, if we were willing to accept the consequences on the return trip. After that, we'd be choosing between making it home and staying off that heading. One more burn buys us 4 days, Ren said. What do we do with 4 days? I'm working on something, I told her. I want to explain what I was thinking without making it sound smarter than it was, because honestly, it was a desperate idea, and it mostly worked by accident. The Varda's engine system had 2 main drives and a set of smaller maneuvering thrusters used for docking and fine positioning. The main drives were what we'd been using for the burns. What I was thinking about was the fuel junction between the main drives and the maneuvering system, a shared reservoir that, if I vented it in a controlled way, would create a pressure release that would push the stern of the ship sideways. It wasn't an explosion exactly. It was more like a very aggressive shove. It would damage the junction and take the maneuvering thrusters offline, which we could live without in open space, and it would burn through the shared fuel reserve, which we also could live without because the maneuvering thrusters used a separate fuel type from the main drives. What it would do was push us sideways hard and fast, faster than the drift could correct in real time. If the drift worked by gradually nudging our heading, a sudden sideways shove might move us far enough off axis that by the time the drift started pulling us back, we'd be on a recovery line instead of an approach line. Boone helped me rig it. He was good with physical systems in a way that I respected deeply, and he didn't ask a lot of questions, just listened to what I needed and made it work. It took us about a day and a half. We ran the second controlled burn at the same time, Ren on the main engines while Boone blew the junction. The noise was significant. Several things fell off shelves. Sura put her hands over her ears. The ship kicked sideways in a way that knocked me off my feet and into the wall of the systems bay, and I lay there on my back, watching the heading display on the ceiling-mounted console spinning through values I'd never seen it hit. When it settled, we were 40 degrees off the approach line. The drift started immediately, but 40 degrees was a lot to pull back. The math was different now. At the rate it was correcting, we'd have about 3 weeks before we were back on a direct heading. 3 weeks was enough to get us out of range. Barely, but enough. Ren confirmed it about an hour after the blow. If we kept the main engines running at moderate thrust on our new heading and the drift rate stayed consistent, we'd be increasing our lateral distance fast enough to eventually break out of whatever was holding us. The maneuvering thrusters were gone. The fuel reserves were tight. The return trip was going to be a careful, slow crawl back. None of us said much about it. We sat in the common area for a while, all 5 of us, and ate a meal together and talked about things that had nothing to do with what was outside. It was the most normal 2 hours we'd had in days. Danny was quiet through most of it. He'd pulled back from the scope after the blow, which I was glad about, and he seemed more present than he'd been. But I caught him looking at the forward wall once, the wall that faced the direction of the object, with an expression I didn't have a word for. I checked the rear scope about 6 hours after we changed heading. I told myself I wasn't going to, but I did. The object was still visible, smaller now, which meant the distance was working. I looked at it for a while in the rear scope, this dark thing sitting against the stars, and I thought about what Danny had said about it not caring. He was right. That was the truest thing anyone had said the whole time. It hadn't sent anything. It hadn't changed. It had just sat there and pulled us toward it, the way a stone pulls water downhill, not with any intent, not with any awareness. We'd been nothing to it, less than nothing. I kept looking at it because I wanted to feel the distance growing, wanted some physical sense of the gap between us increasing. And then I noticed something. I looked at it for a long time to be sure. I checked the scope calibration. I checked the position reading against where it had been when I'd logged its coordinates on day 3. It had moved, not toward us, not away from us, just moved, shifted slightly in a way that didn't match any drift or parallax from our own change in position. It had moved on its own, a small change, the kind you'd miss if you weren't staring at the exact coordinates. In 14 days, that was the first time it had done anything. I stood there at the rear scope for a long time after that. I didn't call anyone else over. I didn't log it right away. I just stood there and thought about 14 days of stillness and what it meant that stillness had now ended. I've been trying to figure out what I think about that since then, whether it matters, whether movement means awareness, whether awareness means we were noticed after all, right at the end, just as we were getting away. I don't have an answer. I'm not sure I want one. What I know is that we're 3 weeks from relay range. Our engines are holding, and the distance between us and that thing gets a little bigger every hour. I check the rear scope less than I used to. Some things are better left unwatched.